So, calling a movie the absolute worst is a very hard task. So I broke it up into a few different categories of the worst. These categories include stuff like if it had a high budget, if the ratings are absolutely terrible, my personal thoughts on the movie, how uncomfortable it was to watch, and how much hype there was going into the movie. But before we decide what the worst movie of all time is, let's break it down a little bit. We're starting off with American Psycho. So this movie is just one of the worst, and I'm telling you, the worst movie I've ever... No, I'm just kidding. That would make some of y'all real mad though. Let's get on to the actual list. Disaster movie. I genuinely think this movie was made specifically to be bad, and that's supposed to be the funny part of it. But the problem is, it wasn't funny. It's about a guy named Will who had a weird dream about a huge natural disaster coming and the world ending. The next day, he has a sweet 16 birthday party even though he's 25. And while he's at his party, he and all the partygoers hear about a huge natural disaster about to hit their city. There's meteors that fall from the sky, severe snowstorms, earthquakes, tornadoes, you get the idea. But this is just the loose plot, because when I tell you it's all over the place, it's all over the place. The people who made this movie had $34 million to play with. I would try and defend them and say the movie's named Disaster Movie because the movie is a disaster because it's terrible and, you know, but I can't. Like, I'm sure maybe it was meant to be an unfunny mess and a complete disaster story-wise. I get it's trying to be like a scary movie type of movie, and I'm a huge scary movie fan. I mean, I love those movies. But something about it just makes me not find it funny at all. Comedy is subjective, so maybe some people find it hilarious. But it's not for me, man. And the special effects, don't even get me started on those. Again, I think that's partly on purpose to try and make the movie, like, funny bad, like so bad it's good, you know what I'm saying? Some of the gags go on for an unbearable amount of time. I will say though, I did enjoy the Flava Flav part. That was pretty funny. And it did have a few different celebrity cameos. I mean, Kim Kardashian had a prominent role in the movie. It just felt like a weird, scary movie type of ripoff. It has all of the movie and pop culture references in it, but they just don't really do it in a way I find entertaining. So for that reason, I consider it one of the worst movies I've ever seen. Next up, a Serbian film. And just a quick warning, this movie has some pretty dark themes about SA, unconsensual stuff, and murder, so if that makes you uncomfortable, skip to this time skip and go to the next one. Okay. This is easily one of the most uncomfortable movies I've ever had to watch. Basically, it's about a retired adult film actor that wants to get back into the industry, just one more time to make some money. He agrees to work for this super rich guy who then drugs him with something that makes him super amped up and forces him to literally do, a bunch of different horrible things. He then wakes up and it's a week later with no recollection of what the hell happened in that time span. But after going back to the place that he was drugged, he found out all of the horrible things he did through a recording. And the rest of the movie mostly consists of him looking through the recordings to see what he did in that week. And this includes, but is not limited to, murder, unconsensual hugging, I'll call it, assault, unconsensual hugging with children. The ending is easily the worst part though, where the main character shoots himself alongside his wife and child, and the rich man's company decides to go to where they did that to themselves and shoot their films with their bodies. And that is how they decide to end that awful movie. That's as far as I'm going to go with the description for YouTube's sake and my own. Now, I'm not going to lie and say the quality of this movie is bad because it clearly had a pretty high production budget, or the quality is just really good. And it was laced with a pretty serious political allegory about the leadership in Serbia. Now, I can't confirm this 100%, but I've also heard from other sources that the creator just made this movie for the sake of making it. It's just a messed up art project, apparently. But again, I can't fully confirm that. But there is a reason it's in this video. The themes portrayed in this movie, as you probably heard me just describe, were extreme and unnecessary. And the few Serbian people I know, they are very ashamed that this movie is attached with their country. When you involve kids and babies into the mix with a movie like this, it's one of the worst. It crosses a serious, very defined line. This movie, in my opinion, is the worst in regards to how disgusting it is. Like I said, it's on this list because it's way too extreme and vile, and we'll get to another disgusting movie later, but as of right now, that's why it's one of the worst movies. The Last Airbender. M. Night Shyamalan, you're my guy, but you really messed up with this movie. Now, the quality in this movie is probably higher than any other movie on this list, but that's only because of the crazy high budget it had. The reason it's on here is because it is the worst cartoon or anime adaptation into a movie I've ever seen. It is hilarious to me that they plan to do multiple movies with this, but the backlash was just so bad they canceled them. I'm not really gonna get into what happens in the movie because it's just a sped up plot of season 1 of Avatar: The Last Airbender. They did make money on this movie though, surprisingly. With a show as popular as Avatar, any movie you make about it is gonna bring in people to the theaters. I think one of the main problems is that they tried to fit so much content into like an hour and a half. You can't fit an entire season of a show into an hour and a half, especially a show as complex and as good as Avatar. You're gonna miss so many key details and important plot points. Now, M. Night Shyamalan said the reason people didn't like this movie was because it wasn't what they expected. He said they expected an adult blockbuster, but instead he made a kids movie, which I find a little strange because Avatar is meant for kids. Why would people go in there expecting an adult blockbuster? And we're not gonna act like Avatar: The Last Airbender isn't a masterpiece of a show, even though it's made for children. It seemed like he was trying to pin it on the fans for expecting something different, which I think is pretty unfair. Another reason is that the cast was completely whitewashed. Characters like Sokka and Katara, who were clearly not white in the show, were played by white actors. And it wasn't just with these characters, it was with a good majority of them. And there is another Avatar live action adaptation coming to Netflix soon, and the cast actually looks like the people in the cartoon. The best thing about this movie, in my opinion, is that they didn't decide to go do the sequels. Maybe it wouldn't seem quite as bad to someone who hasn't seen Avatar, but it's not even a fair competition comparing the two. So when it comes to remakes, I think that this movie is one of the worst of all time. Human Centipede 3. Yeah, this is that disgusting movie I was referring to earlier. And again, the same type of warnings that go for the Serbian film go for this movie. Now, you might be wondering why I said the Human Centipede 3 and not 1 or 2. Why specifically 3? Because why do they need 3? Hell, if they made the second one and stopped, I don't think I would have put the second one on here. But they went and made a third. At least the first one was like, well, you tried making this disgusting movie, it didn't work out, move on. Nah, make 2 more for shits and giggles. And make it so the people from the movie get the idea of making a human centipede from the original movie. So the movies exist in their universe as well. I don't know how that works. I'm not gonna look it up and go try and find out. The movie starts off with a warden of a prison watching the Human Centipede 2. By the way, the guy playing him is the same actor that played the Doctor in the first movie, so I don't know what's going on there, especially because the Doctor died in the first movie. Anyways, his assistant, who is the one that showed him the Human Centipede movies, keeps trying to convince him to make a real massive human centipede using all of the prisoners. The governor of whatever state they're in, I'm assuming Texas, but it could be really anywhere in the Southwest, but the governor comes to visit. He tells Bill that the prison statistics are depressing, and he wants changes now because the way Bill, who is the prison warden, handles problems at the prison is just by using violence. I should mention that Bill is an absolute psychopath, if you couldn't tell he was gonna be one. And it shows when he disciplines the prisoners. We're talking about waterboarding them with boiling water, cutting off a man's testes with a knife and eating them. It's honestly stupid and insane that he does all of this stuff and no one ever speaks up to him or against him to do anything to stop him. Like, all of the people that work at the prison just deal with it. Then out of nowhere, the creator of the Human Centipede movies comes to the prison to vouch that the Human Centipede is 100% medically accurate. And then they make the Human Centipede. I also want to point out that they made something called the Human Caterpillar, where he cuts off the limbs of the death row and life sentence inmates and puts them into a human centipede. This movie has so many extreme moments in it, and I'm not even sure what it was trying to accomplish. So in my opinion, it is the worst and most unnecessary sequel of all time. I want to talk a little bit about the movie Cats. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I only watched half of it. Listen, when a movie is bad and it's a musical, those are two things that are not for me. Yes, technically I sat through the whole movie, but I'm not going to act like I actually paid attention to some of it. I couldn't, man. I'm sorry. With a budget of $95 million, you think they would do something else. Not to mention how creepy these cats looked in this movie. This is a movie meant for children, and it also has some of the lowest reviews I've seen for a movie that was this big. I'm not trying to say this movie had a lot of hype going into it, but everyone knew about it. And apparently the financial loss was made even worse by necessary CGI fixes, and it ended up re-releasing. And this movie had a loss of over $20 million, grossing only $74 million in the box offices. And Cats had some heavy hitters when it comes to their actors. Taylor Swift, Idris Elba, James Corden. I mean, there's no excuse. I'm not a big musical guy, but it's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. So before we get to what I consider to be one of the worst movies of all time, I want to add an honorable mention, Cuties. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of this movie, but I did not watch it. That's why it's an honorable mention. From what I understand, it involves younger girls twerking and doing all kinds of lewd dances on a stage, and I'm not watching that. There was this big outroar about this shouldn't be allowed on Netflix, and for very good reason. The creator was claiming that it was a stance on we shouldn't sexualize young girls. But what does the movie do? It sexualizes young girls. I mean, that seems a little weird, right? That's like telling someone that murder is bad and then you go murder someone to prove your point that murder is bad. I don't know. That's just my thoughts on it. Let's get to the worst movie of all time. So, coming in with an $84 million budget, made in the year I was born, Son of the Mask. So I've decided to name this as my worst movie of all time. In my opinion, of course. It covers all the bases. I mean, it's an awful sequel to The Mask. It had a high budget at $84 million. The reviews online are some of the lowest I've ever seen, and I think it's a terrible movie. Not to mention, this shit terrified me as a kid. And it's meant for kids. Basically, the movie is centered around this dude named Tim. He's a cartoonist and he has a lovely wife along with a dog and a baby. The dog finds the mask of a Norse god named Loki, and the dog and the baby both get powers from this mask. The powers basically just make them have expressions and mannerisms of cartoon characters and all kinds of crazy shit. I think that's the best way to put it. It was hard for me to watch this movie, so excuse me if I miss a few details. But that's basically what happens for the rest of the movie. Now, this movie was made for kids, so I know it's a little harsh to the 17-year-olds judging it, but in the eyes of the law, I am a kid. The plot was trash. The effects were trash. It was a little funny because of how stupid it was sometimes, but it was a shit movie. And like I said, if it was made for kids, why was I so scared of this movie as a child? I was like 8 or 9 and this would come on the TV and I would run out the room. The one major compliment I will give it is that the dog's acting, that was on point. And I know this movie and a lot of the other movies on this list were recent movies, like they were all made in the 2000s. And there's a lot of movies I'm sure I'm missing out on. I would love for you to tell me about them in the comments. Maybe I'll make a part 2 to this video. But yeah, that'll wrap up my worst movies of all time list. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you liked any of these movies, because everyone's taste is different. And have a good one. Peace.